Don't do this during Mercury retrograde. The conversation you keep avoiding is exactly what the sky is asking for. There is a conversation you have been avoiding, not because you do not know what needs to be said, not because you lack the words. You have rehearsed this conversation hundreds of times in the car, in the shower, in the gap between one task and the next, when the managed surface of your day briefly drops and what is actually true rises into the space. You know exactly what you would say. You know exactly how it needs to begin. And you know, with the specific certainty of the body rather than the mind, that it is overdue. Mercury retrograde does not create that conversation. It does not manufacture unfinished business or invent the things that have been left unsaid. What it does is something more precise and more unsettling. It removes the last available excuse for pretending the conversation is not waiting. Mercury goes retrograde several times each year, and in any other year, a Mercury retrograde would simply be a period of revision, review, and return the planet of communication and thought, appearing to move backward through the sky, slowing the forward momentum of new agreements and new initiatives, asking you to go back over what has been left incomplete. Useful, but not urgent. A seasonal rhythm of the sky. But this Mercury retrograde is not occurring in any other year. It is occurring in the first year of the new architecture, in the first astrological year to unfold entirely on the ground that Saturn and Neptune seated at 0 degrees Aries when they met there for the first time in 9,000 years. Everything this year has been about closing the gap between what you actually are and how you actually live. The lunar eclipse stripped what was maintained out of habit. The solar eclipse sealed the new chapter. Jupiter in Cancer expanded your capacity to need and receive honestly. Mars in Aries provided the force to move in the direction your body already chose. The astrological new year opened the first full cycle on the new ground. And now Mercury, the planet of words, of communication, of the signal that moves between what is interior and what is expressed, turns backward. Not to undo what the year has built, to collect what the year has revealed but not yet spoken aloud. Mercury retrograde in this sequence is not a pause, it is an accounting. The sky is asking, what have you understood in the months since February 20th that you have not yet said? What clarity have you reached? What recognition have you arrived at? What truth has surfaced through the sequence that you have been carrying internally, without letting it become the words between you and the people who need to hear them? That is what this retrograde has come to surface. And the conversation you keep avoiding is not a coincidence. It is the specific piece of the year's work that requires voice to complete. Stay here, because Mercury retrograde is one of the most misunderstood transits in astrology. And the specific mistake most people make during it, the mistake this video will help you avoid, is treating it as a period to go quiet when it is actually a period to finally speak the things that have been too long. Interior. Let me start with what Mercury actually is. The fastest planet in our solar system. Mercury orbits the Sun in just 88 days, spending roughly 3 weeks in each sign of the zodiac. Its orbital path is inside Earth's path. Mercury is closer to the Sun than we are, which means it sometimes appears to move backward from our perspective. This apparent backward motion is Mercury retrograde, not a literal reversal, an optical phenomenon produced by the relative positions of Mercury, Earth, and the Sun. When Mercury goes retrograde, it is actually moving in the same direction it always moves. What changes is the perspective. And perspective is the whole point. In ancient traditions, Mercury was the messenger, the planet that moved between worlds, between the gods and humans, between the interior and the exterior, between what was thought and what was communicated. The Romans called this planet Mercury and gave him winged sandals, the symbol of a force that moves faster than ordinary perception. The Greeks called him Hermes, the only god who could travel freely between the land of the living and the land of the dead. This was not a myth about a supernatural being. It was a cosmological description of what this planet governs, the movement of information across boundaries, between thought and word, between interior knowing and external expression. between what you understand and what you say. When Mercury turns retrograde, the messenger slows. The movement between interior and exterior becomes less fluid. The signal that normally travels freely between what you know and what you express encounters friction. And what that friction reveals is exactly where the signal has been blocked, not by the retrograde, but by the choices you have been making to keep certain things from crossing the boundary between interior and spoken. Mercury retrograde is a diagnostic. It shows you where the communication has been incomplete by making the incompleteness impossible to avoid. In ordinary forward motion, it is relatively easy to carry unfinished conversations, unsaid truths, and unspoken recognitions without the gap becoming undeniable. The forward momentum of daily life provides enough distraction. But when Mercury slows and turns, that distraction becomes less effective. The unsaid things press forward. They surface in conversations in unexpected ways. They appear in dreams. They announce themselves in the specific quality of tension that exists in the space between you and the person who needs to hear what you have been keeping interior. That tension is not a problem Mercury retrograde created. It is the problem Mercury retrograde has come to identify. Now let me tell you what the specific texture of this Mercury retrograde feels like, because if you have been experiencing any of these things in the days leading up to the station, they are not coincidental. They are Mercury's arrival signal. The first thing is an increase in the frequency of the unsaid thought. Normally, the unsaid thing occupies the peripheral vision of your inner life. You are aware of it, but you can keep it at the edge. Under Mercury retrograde, it moves toward the center. You find it in the middle of ordinary conversations, arriving uninvited. You find it at the beginning of interactions with specific people, sitting between you and them before anything else is said. This is not anxiety. It is the signal identifying exactly where the communication is blocked. The second thing is a change in the quality of your listening. Mercury retrograde is known for miscommunication, for things said and heard differently than intended, but less commonly understood is the heightened receptivity that accompanies this. When Mercury slows, you hear things you normally talk over. You hear the unspoken content beneath what people are saying. You hear the distance between what someone says and what they mean. And you hear your own responses as they are about to leave your mouth and recognize, sometimes with discomfort, that what you are about to say is the managed version rather than the true one. The third sign is the return of specific conversations that seem to be finished. Someone whose name arrives in your mind that you realize you left something unsaid with. A relationship in which a recent exchange ended before reaching its actual conclusion. A professional interaction in which the surface communication was complete, but the real communication, the one beneath it, was never addressed. Mercury retrograde in this sequence is specifically interested in the conversations that touched the territory the year has been working on. The conversations about what you actually need, about the structural change the year requires, about who you actually are now that the old architecture has been superseded. Those conversations are what the retrograde is returning to. And then there is the fourth sign, the one that signals what must not be done during this period. An impulse to fill the silence. To communicate with high volume and high frequency to compensate for the quality of communication the retrograde is asking for. New contracts signed quickly before the retrograde slows them down. New commitments made before the period of review. New beginnings launched in the window before Mercury stations. This impulse is the retrograde's most reliable trap, and avoiding it requires understanding why it is a trap. Mercury retrograde is a period of review, not initiation. It asks you to go back over what is incomplete, not forward into what is new. Any agreement made in the urgency of the pre-retrograde window will be subject to revision when Mercury stations direct. Any commitment entered for reasons of speed rather than genuine readiness will reveal its incompleteness in the weeks that follow. Any new beginning launched to outrun the retrograde's slower energy will eventually have to return and address what was left behind in the rush. So here is what you must not do during Mercury retrograde. Do not sign new agreements that contain anything you have not fully examined. Do not begin conversations you are not prepared to complete. Mercury retrograde has a quality of making things surface all the way past where you planned to stop. And most importantly, do not use the busyness of surface communication as a substitute for the specific conversation the retrograde is asking for, the one you keep avoiding, the one that has been waiting. Here is what you must do instead. There are 3 specific things the retrograde window is asking of you, and all 3 involve narrowing the gap between what you know and what you say. The first is to complete a conversation that is technically finished but actually incomplete. There is a specific interaction from the recent months, most likely from the period since February 20th, that ended at the surface level but did not reach its real content. The exchange was concluded, but the truth beneath it was not spoken. You both know this. The incompleteness is present in the quality of the space between you. Mercury retrograde is asking you to go back to that conversation and take it one layer deeper, not to reopen the surface, to go beneath it to where the actual thing lives and say what was not said. The second is to find the words for something you have understood but not yet articulated. There is a truth that surfaced during this year's sequence through Jupiter, in Cancer's excavation of your needs, through the eclipse's identification of what was no longer serving you, through Mars in Aries' delivery of the direction your body already chose that you have been carrying as a body knowing rather than a spoken knowing. Mercury retrograde is the period to find the language for it, not to broadcast it necessarily, to give it words, even in private, so that it can move from interior understanding to articulable truth. The third is to say one thing you have been managing around. There is a specific truth in one of your primary relationships with a partner, a parent, a friend, a colleague that you have been approaching but not quite reaching. Every conversation touches the edge of it and then veers away into safer territory. Mercury retrograde in this sequence is asking you to stop veering, not with cruelty, not with urgency, with the quiet directness of someone who has finally run out of reasons to delay. Say the thing. In the specific ordinary context of your relationship with that person, not in a declared conversation, not with preamble, simply as part of what is actually true when they ask how you are, or what you think, or what you need. Mercury retrograde does not ask for confrontations. It asks for completions. The difference is important. A confrontation is designed to produce an outcome through force. A completion is designed to let what is true be audible, so that both people in the conversation are operating on real information rather than managed information. Most relationships that are struggling are not struggling because of what has been said. They are struggling because of what has not been said. Mercury retrograde, in this specific year, is the sky's most deliberate invitation to close that gap, and in closing it, to complete the year's primary work, the alignment of what is actually true with how you actually live. There is one more thing. In the weeks ahead, as Mercury moves backward through the degrees it recently crossed, it will return to territory that the eclipses, the Jupiter station, and the Mars ingress activated earlier in the year. What this means practically is that themes and conversations and recognitions that arose during those transits will return not to start over but to deepen. If there was something Jupiter in Cancer surfaced about what you need that you acknowledged privately but did not yet speak, Mercury retrograde will bring it back for speech. If there was something the solar eclipse sealed that you have been processing internally without yet voicing, Mercury retrograde will bring it back for voice. If there was a direction Mars in Aries pointed that you have not yet named to anyone outside your own interior, Mercury retrograde will bring it back for naming. This is the completion phase of the year's sequence. Not the end of the sequence, the arc continues, but the period in which what the year has built becomes spoken. The mind catching up with what the body has known for months, the word being given to what has been wordless, the interior work finally crossing the boundary into the exterior conversation, and in that crossing, becoming real in the way that only the spoken can be. Write in the comments the thing you have been carrying that needs to be said, not to the person who needs to hear it to yourself. Here, in this space, where the act of giving it words for the first time is the beginning of its journey toward being spoken to the person who needs to receive it. Subscribe and turn on the bell Because as Mercury moves through its retrograde period, I will walk you through each phase, what surfaces in the first week, what deepens in the middle passage, and what the station direct reveals about the words that finally crossed from interior to spoken during this window. The universe has spoken. What comes next is in your hands. Let me be precise about one more dimension of this retrograde that most forecasts will not mention. Because the common understanding of Mercury retrograde focuses almost entirely on what to avoid, do not sign contracts, do not make major decisions, do not buy electronics, and while there is genuine wisdom in that caution, it misses the deeper function this period serves. Mercury retrograde is not primarily a period of restriction. It is a period of return. Stepping backward is not always a retreat. Sometimes it is the only way to reach something you walked past. You have walked past something this year. In the forward motion of the months since February, the urgency of the eclipses, the expansion of Jupiter, the initiating force of Mars, there was not always room to let communication catch up with understanding. You understood things you did not yet have words for. You arrived at truths the sequence carried to you. But the translation from body knowing to spoken word did not always happen in the moment. Mercury retrograde is the stepping backward to collect those translations, not to undo the forward movement, to ensure that what moved forward in understanding also moves forward in expression. This is why the conversation you keep avoiding is not a problem Mercury retrograde is creating. It is a resource. Mercury retrograde is returning you to the specific piece of the year's work that can only be completed in the spoken register. The timing is precise. Every element of this year's sequence has been building toward the alignment of what is true with how you live. And now, Mercury turns backward to collect the words that have not yet been spoken, the words that will close the gap between what you have become and what you have said about it. In the weeks Mercury is retrograde, conversations that seem to be avoiding certain territory will begin reaching it. Not because you force them, because the retrograde makes the unspoken harder to sustain. The managed distance between what is true and what is said requires more energy to maintain. And at some point for most people, in the middle passage, the energy required to sustain the gap will exceed the energy required to simply close it. That is the moment to speak. In the ordinary exchange, the unremarkable moment of an ordinary day, when what is actually true simply surfaces without armor and says itself. That is what the retrograde has been building toward. And that is what this sequence has been building toward. The moment when what is genuinely true becomes genuinely said. Mercury, the messenger with winged sandals, fulfilling the function he was named for, carrying what is real from where it lives to where it needs to arrive. The retrograde is the window in which what has been wordless finally finds its words. Not to fill the silence with more managed communication, to let the specific unmanaged truth cross the boundary it has been waiting at. The conversation you keep avoiding is not waiting to be avoided any longer. It is waiting to be completed. Write what needs to be said. Give it to the page before you give it to the person. Let the act of writing be the first crossing. Mercury retrograde, in this specific year, in this specific sequence, is the exact window the sky has provided for it. The messenger is slowing. The signal is concentrating. The unsaid thing has been waiting long enough. It is time to let it cross.